Here I am again, keeping at it. I'm trying to get something done every day. Clean up the piston, cylinder, rods for number 2 and number 1. I have them cleaned up already. I figured I didn't have to show you all that again. And have the rings gapped and the grooves cleaned and the gasket surfaces sanded and the holes chamfered and threads chased. Gaskets made. So I have those, except for my final washing. I have everything for cylinder number 2 and 1 ready to go. But I want to show you a few things. Well, cylinder, there's nothing really anything to show you on there. So I'm going to show you the pistons for number 2 and 1. Now this is piston for number 2. And I'm going to see if I can show you real closely. Cylinder number 2 and piston number 2. This was the most rusted of all 4. You can see the pitting in the piston skirt. So it was by far the most corroded. But it'll be fine. See, there you can see, came into focus pretty good, but it'll be fine. And if you look at the top of the piston, look how rough that is compared to the top of number 1, which looks perfect. So, I'll tell you a little bit about this one. When I took this apart, cylinder number 1, I took the head off, unbolted the cylinder, unbolted the rod, and pulled the cylinder with the piston and rod in it off. And number 1 I put in the press and I barely touched it and it just about slid right out. And I thought, oh, this is going to be easy. And I think I told you about that when about year 2000 when I was going to move this home. I thought I should put fuel oil in the cylinders, let it soak until I got at it. And at that time I noticed the spark plug wires were disconnecting, the plugs were loose. And then I remembered that I had put fuel oil in the cylinders back in the 70s when I worked for Allen for a couple years. So I thought that probably went a long way to saving. But anyway, number 1 just about slid right out without hardly any pressure at all. And I thought this won't be so bad. You can see the skirt looks real nice on this one. There isn't any pitting whatsoever. Now, I wish these things could talk. I've never noticed this before. Let's see if we can get it to focus. See? I never noticed that before. See them little bitty center punch marks making the shape of a V? And they're pointing toward a wrist pin hole. Now someone put those on there at one time. So like I say, that I wish I knew their reasoning for that. If that was their way of indicating which way the piston was supposed to go in, I don't know. But those are definitely a manufacturing mark. Those are something someone marked this piston when they had it apart. But I guess we'll never know. Now I'll get back at the story of piston number 2. As you can see, the top of this one is heavily pitted. I mean, you can't, there's no markings to be made out or anything. It's heavily pitted. And like I said, I thought after I took number 1 off, oh, this is going to be easy. Well, then I got the cylinder number 2. It was a whole different story. This one, when I unbolted it, the cylinder, and unbolted the rod, I lifted them off as a unit. Like I said, the rod and piston is 35 pounds or more with the cap. And in the cylinder, they must have been stronger 10 years ago. But I lifted it off and I put it in my press. I had a 20-ton jack in the press. And I tried pressing and it wouldn't move. And I thought, you know, I just pushed the jack as tight as it would go and it just wouldn't move. And I thought about it. And then I thought I'd try something. There was a older gentleman in the neighborhood. I got to know him actually 25 years ago when I was working for UPS. I delivered parts to him. He worked out of his garage on the farm, and would rebuild old tractors and trucks, anything old, and he had a way of making anything old run without getting carried away with spending a ton of money. He would have ways of repairing things. Anyway, one of the things he told me, tricks he had, when he had a piston that was stuck real bad, and of course it had to be partway down in the bore to do this, he said he'd pour about an inch of fuel oil on top of the piston and then light it on fire. And he said that would slowly add warmth to the cylinder wall, that it should slowly creep down the side, the heat on the cylinder wall, and then the fuel oil should hopefully try and soak down in. So I took this cylinder outside with the piston stuck in it, and I lit it on fire, and I don't remember how long I left it burn for, and then put it out, cleaned it out. Maybe I let it burn all the way out, I don't remember. And then I took it in on my press with the 20-ton jack in it. And again, I put as much pressure on it as I possibly could with the jack. I had a longer handle on it, and I was pulling on it as hard as I could. I was afraid I'd break the jack, because I did that once with a hydraulic jack. Pumped on it so hard till the cylinder inside split. But I had that much pressure on it. Then I reached underneath. You know, on a hydraulic press, you have the channel irons underneath that it's sitting on. And I pounded on those with a big hammer to give it a jar on top of it. And finally, it made a big bang, a little eek, and it moved. So then I jacked the pressure on again, as tight as I could. And I'd push it as tight as I could. And then all of a sudden, this time I didn't have to hit it, I don't think. And then, boom! The whole press would jump when it moved a little bit. And it moved again. And it kept that up almost all the way out of the cylinder. I mean, I was just afraid something was going to break. But I had put a steel disc on here that went out very close to the edge because I didn't want to be breaking this piston. You know, so I put even pressure on it. But that's what I went through to get this piston out. So, just another little story. And sadly, the older gentleman who told me about putting fuel oil on it and burn it, he passed away a few years ago. And he was a wealth of knowledge about old engines and old machinery. I mean, when he wasn't working on them, he must have been reading service manuals, because he could read off statistics and specifications about any engine you could think of, practically, as long as it was pre-1970. He'd go all the way back into the 50s and the 40s. He could just tell you anything about them. So anyway, I just thought I'd tell you that little bit of a story about getting this piston out, and maybe somebody out there someday will try the same thing with a stuck piston, putting fuel on top and lighting it on fire and let it burn. I don't know if it helped or not, but it seemed to, because I couldn't get it to move before I did that. So now I'm going to go at giving these the final cleanup to get ready for installation. Now this is my method for final cleanup on freshly bored cylinders. And I'm using it to clean the pistons and the rods, all the parts. Just super hot water and a bunch of Dawn dish soap or Tide laundry detergent, something like that. But a good soap and really hot water. Oh, that water is blistering hot. So it'll take a while for it to cool down enough for me to get my hands in there and scrub it. So I'll be coming back to it in a little while. There, now we can get in there and scrub them. I seem to do that every time. I lift it out, I forget about the water in the water jack and dump it out on my foot. We'll take it and blow it off. Now while the cylinder's good and hot, I blow it off. It dries basically instantly. Now I'll take and spray the whole thing down inside and out with WD-40. And I'll wipe the inside just to make sure it's all coated good. Now I'll set that aside. Now, I put cylinder number 1 in the hot water, and while we're waiting for that to heat up, so it dries off good when I blow it off after I scrub it, I'm going to show you a little more about these pistons. This is piston number 2, and you can see the 4 bolts. So the tops must come off of these pistons, which I wouldn't even think about taking them off. And this is kind of interesting. The head of this cap screw has different lettering on it than the other 3. It has FEU, and the other ones have CLN. I'm going to have to look at number 1 piston, see what's on those. So maybe that's been taken off and someone replaced one of the cap screws. And another, when I was cleaning them up, I noticed the piston here must be hollow in the center before, or open in the center before the top is bolted on, because you'll probably hear the difference. If I tap on it over here, it sounds solid. If I tap on it in the middle, it sounds like it's hollow underneath. So my guess is there's a hole in the middle of the piston before the top is bolted on. So I just wanted to show you that little bit about the pistons. And the same with the pistons. Forgot to dump the water out of it. I maybe would have cleaned these in my parts washer out in the shop. Not the cylinders, but the other parts. But it's pretty cold out there to put in your hands in parts cleaner. And I don't think I better be using solvent in the basement of the house. I don't think my wife would appreciate the smell going up into the house. So there. That's ready. And the connection rod. This is probably the best looking Babbitt in any of the rods right here on number 1 in the rod. I'll show you some of the defects in the number 2 rod. See, this is number 1 rod cap, and that one looks really good Babbitt on there too. Oh, there's a few cracks in it there, but it's one of the better looking ones, or about the best looking ones. Now this is number 2 rod cap. I don't know if you can see it, but this has a poor Babbitting again too. Looks like there was a cold spot there with a cold joint where the Babbitt came around. And also here with the pinning, it looks like it must have been cold as it was pouring. I'd like to think that Caterpillar wouldn't have sent them out to the factory with Babbitt jobs that looked like that. So I'd like to think that these were repoured by someone else at a later date. So that's about it for today. Thanks again for watching, and next you'll be seeing me putting number 2 and number 1 on.